I will hand over to our Unicorn colleague. They will introduce themselves, and then from there we will take. So yeah, Unicorn team to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the intro, Pushpender. Hello and welcome once more, everyone, on today's webinar. Today's topic, as Pushpender mentioned, will be ECCo on Linux, so some installation and upgrade. My name is Daniel Venota, and I'm ECCo analyst here in Unicorn. And with me, there is Michael and Jiří.
So hello, my name is Michael Pinkas, and I have been working as an ECCo developer.
Hello, my name is Jiří Kakduda, and I've been working as ECCo software architect for the last 6 years.
Yeah, in case of any question during the webinar, do not hesitate to ask us. You can raise your hand on the Teams, or alternatively, you can just send it to the chat, and we will get back to it. So, regarding the agenda, we will first check some new features for the spring and fall release, which were released this year. We'll compare it to deployment specifically with the previous version, and by the previous version, I mean the ECP 4.12. Then we'll go to some prerequisites and general information, so some description on hardware requirements, some firewall flows, etc., etc. And in the second part, the practical one, we will go to the installation, configuration, and registration process, as well as the upgrade process. The installation will also include the Java 17 installation as a part of the whole process. So it will be completely from scratch, from like clean server to the server with ECCo client completely installed. So, let's start with new features for the spring and fall release. Regarding the deployment, there's one major change. It changed a bit. On the previous version, as you can see on the left picture, the internal broker was embedded to the application itself, so it was part of the ECP endpoint and EDX toolbox. And let's say both these components of the application were connected to the same database. It could be like the Apache Derby on a file system. In that case, the internal broker was using the KHDB, or it was shared external database, as described on the picture. That's what we call the ActiveMQ deployment. This picture applied for the ECP 4.12 and EDX 1.13 and older versions since the spring release, where the Artemis was introduced. That's the second picture on the right side. The internal broker was actually moved out of the application, so right now it's a separate instance. This deployment has some advantages that you can share one internal broker with both ECP endpoint and EDX toolbox. However, in this case, the ECCo internal broker is not connected to the external database. However, it uses a file journal, which can be stored on a local file system, or in case of high availability setup, it can be or should be pointing to some shared file system. Also, because of the change from the embedded broker to the external instance, some properties related to the embedded internal broker were removed since the last version, or since the ECP 4.12. So it were all JDBC properties connected to the internal broker, as well as the external broker properties and active credentials, which were used for the health check. Also, an important thing to know is that ActiveMQ database tables are not used anymore. So you can remove them. This part is covered within the installation upgrade guide. Sorry, within the upgrade guide. And also the ActiveMQ autocreate tables property was removed, as it is not required anymore. Regarding some new features specifically for the Spring release, so versions ECP 4.14 and EDX 1.14. The first and obvious change was that the version numbers were united. So the ECP version 4.13 was skipped. So right now both minor version numbers for ECP and EDX are aligned, which should lower the potential confusion from that. Regarding some changes of the operating system support, the central components for ECCo, namely ECP broker, ECP component directory, and EDX service catalog, are not supported on Windows anymore. The Linux deployment is the only option in this case. Regarding the databases, there's no change. The same database and the same versions are still supported. Regarding compatibility, the support for key-cloak external authentication was removed. So the only option that's remaining for now for the external authentication is the LDAP. Also, the naming of some Prometheus metrics differs from the ActiveMQ Classic, which was used on the ECP 4.12 and the older versions. Now it's a bit different. However, the table with description of the name change is described in, I believe, administration guide. So there's no issue with that. You can easily find it. Also, the biggest change, the major change within this release, is the removal of the embedded internal broker from ECP endpoint, EDX toolbox, and service catalog. This embedded internal broker was changed from the ActiveMQ Classic to ActiveMQ Artemis, and just like moved out. So now the internal broker is completely separate component, which, as I already mentioned, has the advantage of the option of sharing the one internal broker for ECP endpoint and EDX toolbox, as well as for some several instances of registrations of ECP endpoints. That option is unlocked by the Q prefix, but we'll get to it a bit later. Also, the internal broker and the ECP broker comes with Prometheus metrics. Specifically for the ECP broker, there is a new metric which displays the number of days until the expiration of the certificate. So you can easily monitor the expiration of the ECP broker. Yeah, as I mentioned, multiple components can use a single internal broker. This is done by the option to configure a separate queue prefix for the internal and external queues. And yeah, another change on the EDX service catalog is that it now validates the network configuration file name. Basically, what it means, the component code of the service catalog will be added to the file name of the network configuration, and it will be validated if the code is present and if the code is correct. If it's the same as configured in the EDX service catalog configuration. This change was made to prevent some potential accidental upload from network configuration to some different environment. Yeah, maybe before we move to the fall release, do you have any questions for the changes in spring release?
Yeah, and just to cover these new changes, we have covered quite in detail in our first session. So if you have missed, just in case, it will be, you can refer to it once it is available on the YouTube. I will inform. I can paste I will copy paste the YouTube link in the chat. But yeah, just check on Monday, and yeah, I'm quite sure that by Monday we will have those videos uploaded.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you are like anybody interested to some more detail about the changes, or potentially, and we'll get to it a bit later within the practical part. If you're interested more in some more detail of the internal broker, you can definitely check the first webinar, and there is more information for that. So yeah, so there are probably no questions, so we can continue with the new features for the fall release. The version numbers are the ECP 4.15 and ADX 1.15. Regarding the operating system support, the support of Windows Server 2016 was removed, and instead of that, we added the support for Windows Server 2022. In the same way as for the previous release, the database support does not change, so still the same database, still the same versions. Regarding the compatibility changes, the support for old network configuration syntax, the one without the domain specification, was removed. So the EDX service catalog and also the EDX tools will not accept the old syntax anymore. You would need to update it. However, it is the upgrade procedure. The update procedure is described within the upgrade guide. So, and it's also pretty simple. So, no worries. Also, the database backup and restore feature was added. So right now you can very easily from the graphical user interface download a backup zip file with data from the database, and then you can restore it in case of some failure, etc. Or in case that you need to reinstall the ECCo, you can easily just restore the backup instead of clean registration. ECP endpoint also, since this version uses compound indexes for messages table, this basically means that the listing of messages within the database is much faster. Also, the ECP endpoint is not trying to connect to unreachable ECP brokers anymore. So if the broker URL changed and it's not reachable anymore, or if the ECP broker was removed from the network, so revoked, the endpoint will not try to connect it anymore. And also, as mentioned on previous slide, the ECP endpoint Unix toolbox can use the Q prefix, and within this release we just extended the implementation, and you can also configure specific Q prefix, a different one for the business application queues. So basically everything from the edx.yaml and every let's say queue for business application on ECP endpoint, which then can be configured. This also applies for the queues that are used by the EDX. So keep that in mind. Are there any questions for the fall release? Probably not. So let's continue with some prerequisites and general information before the installation of the ECCo. All these information that we will provide and describe are covered within the ECP and EDX upgrade and installation guides. So if you are interested in some more stuff regarding that, you can refer to those and find more information. Regarding the minimum hardware requirements, please note that the following table that you can see on screen is only an estimation, and the real requirements may differ based of the traffic or other performance requirements. We also recommend the usage of virtual machines, which can be easily resized when it is necessary, or alternatively some container application manager, so Docker, for example. Although the most important part is that there is no change since the previous ECCo version. So in this case, again, the ECP for 12 and its EDX version. For the ECP endpoint with internal broker on the same server, the minimum requirement is still 4 cores for CPU, 8 GB of RAM, and at least 40 GB of disk storage. And for the toolbox, it's 2 cores CPU, 4 GB of RAM, and at least 20 GB of storage. However, as I mentioned, it may differ depending on the message traffic, especially the storage. Regarding the necessary flows that needs to be opened, there are basically 2, let's say, categories of flows. The first one is for ECCo components. Those you can see in the table. So it's port 8443 for ECP endpoint, and by default 8443 also for EDX toolbox. However, where the toolbox is deployed on the same server.
Hallo, Riese. Ja, klar.
Please
Okay.
continue. I'm not sure.
However, in case that EDX toolbox is deployed on the same server as ECP endpoint, the port 8443 for the EDX toolbox is mostly changed to 9443. So that port number may differ. And for the internal broker, then there is also 5672 port and 8161. The 5672 is used for the IMQP connection, and 8161 then for the web console. Regarding the other, let's say, category of the flow that needs to be open is the flows for external databases if used. But we will get to the specific ports and database variants in next few slides. Regarding the communication protocols, for the messaging, the MQPS is used by default, it's used within the ECP network. Then there are some integration channels, but that's a bit different topic. And for the REST API and the user interface, the HTTPS is used. Alternatively, you can configure the HTTP without the TLS. However, by default, it uses TLS for this. Regarding the deployment types, there are still 2 options, so the standalone deployment and high availability deployment. The standalone one is the most simple, as it does not require other services such as database. However, it still can use some external database if needed. As I mentioned, it's the simplest option. By default, in this case, the ECCo uses Apache Derby embedded database, which is then fully managed by the application. But we'll get to that again a bit later. And regarding the high availability deployment, this can be achieved by with at least 2 ECP or EDX components sharing the same external database. and at least 2 internal broker instances with shared storage. That's what you can see on the picture below on the right side, that basically ECP endpoint, both nodes of ECP endpoint are connected to the shared database, and then the internal broker is connected to one shared file journal. The advantage of this is when one node of ECP or EDX goes down, the system will still continue to function. Yeah, but in general, the deployment times are still the same. Regarding databases and some preparation of it before the installation of ECCo-SP, as I mentioned, the ECCo-SP can be configured to use the embedded database, so Apache Derby, and that is then fully managed by the application and does not need any additional setup. However, alternatively, you can use some external database, which then must be installed prior to the installation. The supported databases and their default ports are Oracle 19C with port 1521, MS SQL Server 2019 with port 1433, MySQL 8 with port 3306, and PostgreSQL 13 with port 5432. Those ports are just default for those databases. Regarding preparation, the database must be firstly installed and configured, and also some application schema must be configured with user access prior to the installation itself. But all those informations are covered within the ECP and EDX installation guides, chapter external databases. Yeah, another thing that is obviously necessary before the installation is to obtain the ECCo-SP installers. The ECCo-SP client, so ECP endpoint and EDX toolbox, can be obtained from the ECCo-SP webpage, from the link you can see on the screen. The same applies also for the Docker binaries, so it depends on your deployment. And regarding the ECCo-SP central components, namely ECP component directory, broker, and EDX service catalog, they are shared via the ENTSO-E share file. And access there can be then granted by pushpender. Another thing is to obtain the component code. The component code then needs to be unique within each ECP network and also all synchronized networks. The energy identification coding, so EIC, scheme is mostly used. Within the EIC, there is object type V, so-called the EIC V code, which is used for the locality, and it is also mostly used as the component code within the ECCo-SP. So yeah, the component code, you can use it, and the component code can be obtained from your local or some central issuing office for your country. Yeah. Do you have any questions regarding these prerequisites? Probably not. So in that case, we can go to the next slide, and let's continue with the practical part that will be presented by Michael.
So starting with the installation, first some agenda. We will start with installation, configuration, and registration of the ECCo-SP client. This will include the Java 17, installation and configuration for the internal broker, endpoint and toolbox, and after that we will do upgrade of the client from the version ECP 4.12 and EDX 1.14 to version 4.15 and 1.15. Yeah, once again, the installation, we will be using encrypted passwords on all of the components, and we will start by the installation of the Java. To start with the installation of the Java, we can start the chapter general installation prerequisites. These were already covered in the first part of the presentation. I will just focus on the Java itself. The supported version is the Java 17.0.12, and yeah, let's start. We can check the Java version. As we can see, the Java is not installed. We can install the Java using the yum install command. Yeah, let's accept that. In the meantime, we can take a look at the rest of the chapter. Here we have the install mentioned. After the installation, we should check in the configuration of the Java security that secure random source is the def urandom instead of def random. Here we have the path to that file. It may differ a little based on your installation. So it was in the configure security and check security. And in this file, we can look for the def/random or random. You can see that by default it is not set. So let me just update it quickly. And let's proceed. This step is mandatory for all of the ECCo components, and all of them use the same Java version of code. Next, we have the firewall, which we have already enabled, and how to configure it, either Linux or Windows. Then we have the databases and its ports, component code, and next we have the chapter for the checksum verification. If wanted, you can follow this.
Yeah, maybe just real quick, there is a question from Andre. There are no installation packages version 4.15. When will the ECP-EDX packages be accessible on that web page? Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention the ECP 4.15 is currently in its SAT phase, so it's still being tested by the external parties. However, the packages should be available like during the next week or the week after that. So yeah, so they are not available at this point. However, it will be available soon. Yeah.
So moving on to the installation of the internal broker, the ECCo Artemis. Just a quick note: all of the installation chapters have a common prerequisites chapter, which I won't go through, but it basically refers to the general common prerequisites and the requirements, like that you have to have the installer and so on. So moving into the chapter 7.4, installation of Linux. Here we can see a table of the variables used throughout the guide. Once again, prerequisites and installation itself. So I will move to the opt folder where I have the installers located. I can just do rpm I equals p Artemis. That's pretty much it for the installation. The equals p Artemis and all of the rest of the applications are by default enabled to start up during the startup of the server. This behavior can be disabled by the systemctl disable following the service name. Short description of the folders of the ECCo Artemis. As already mentioned, this was already covered in more detail in the previous webinar for the new features. I will go just briefly through the configuration of the Artemis. But if you want, you can refer to that webinar in case you need more details about the configuration. Also, you can refer to the official Artemis documentation regarding any other details. So let's configure the Artemis broker. I will start by configuring the custom passwords. This can be done using the configure passwords shell script. This script is provided also for the endpoint and toolbox, so you might already know it. And it is located in the main configuration folder of the ECCo Artemis instance. So to start the script, I can just start it. I will select that I want to use hashed passwords for the user credentials. It is unfortunately not possible to use encrypted passwords here. Then I will use the encrypted passwords for the key store path password in the configuration. We will see that in a moment. The actual password, I will use just password. For the key store as well, password. Okay. I'm now located in the configuration folder of the ECCo Artemis. Just to see that, I can go into the broker XML, which is the main configuration file. I can also open the installation guide, chapter 7.7, the internal broker configuration. We have the paths mentioned here as well as the default key store. We will get back to that in a moment. Basically, all of the main configurations are made in the broker XML, so it is basically the most important file. And let's look into it and see what we can configure. The most important part for us for now is the acceptor configuration, located in the middle of the configuration file. Here we can see the acceptor, which is the definition where the internal broker IMQPS port is listening. We can see that by default it is listening on all interfaces, the port 5672, same as on the ActiveMQ. We can see that the SSL is enabled by default and that keystore and truststore are the same files located in the configuration folder, the keystore JKS. This file is provided by us. It contains a default certificate that is valid for 10 years. Just to mention that, it is possible to just leave it here, and the endpoint and toolbox will be able to connect to this internal broker. However, of course, it is recommended to modify this key store to use your own certificates. Next, what we can notice is the truststore and key store passwords being encrypted, and this was done by the configure passwords shell script. Okay, the rest of the configuration was already covered in the other webinar, so I will not go through that in here. Next, what we have to configure, we can go into the Bootstrap XML. Here we can see the definition of the web console. We can see that by default it is listening on the local host, so it will not be accessible from any other server. I will modify this property and set it to 4 zeros, so it is accessible from anywhere. You can also put the server IP here, and then we have the 8161 port, which indicates that the web console is running on this port. I will just save this file. Next important file is the Yolokia access. This is also related to the web console. We can see that by default, the access is possible only from the local host. So I will leave just the asterisk here, which basically tells us that we can connect from anywhere. This is for the cross-origin request protection. Next, I will open the ECP administration guide, the chapter 6.5, which is the, once again, internal broker configuration, the user management chapter. Here we can see the Artemis users properties, and also there is Artemis roles. In these files, we have the definition of the users and roles that can access the internal broker. That is the IMQPS part and the web console. As we will use this internal broker for both the endpoint and toolbox, we will need to define a user for the toolbox. I opened the Artemis users, and we can see the definition for the endpoint, with the default password being password, and of course it is hashed by the shell script. I will define a user for the toolbox. However, so it is as well encrypted as well. We can refer to the ECP administration guide, and here we have the command that will hash the password for us. It is using the Artemis command executable from the binary folder. Next, we have the option to mask the password, that we will hash it, and then the input. Copy that. I will use by default the password, and the password, by executing this command, we can see the hash being created. Going back into the Artemis users, I can on the new line define the username followed by ENC brackets. This tells us the password is encrypted or rather hashed, and then I will paste the password here. I will save this. Then we have the Artemis roles. Going into that, we can see the definition of the IQ role, which is the only role defined by default, followed by the endpoint user. So we need to add the toolbox user as well. So this should be it for the basic configuration of the ECCo Artemis. And we can maybe, if there are any questions regarding the installation. Not. So now we will proceed with the installation of the ECP endpoint. Chapter 8. Installation on Linux. once again, the variables used throughout the guide, prerequisites, basically the Java, that you have the RPM file, and also the registration key store. And we can once again, same as on the internal broker, we can just issue the RPM-I command. I'm back in the OPT, where I have the installer located, and I can just start it. Let's follow the installation. Scrolling down, chapter 848, custom passwords. Once again, I will use the configure passwords shell scripts to encrypt or hash the passwords. This one is located in the configuration folder of the ECCo endpoint. I can just run it as this. First, we have the option for the user passwords. Here we can use the encrypted passwords. Technical account passwords, this is the passwords for the key stores, database, and so on. I will again use the encrypted option. Next, we have the encryption key. We can use pretty much anything we want. I will use the default encryption algorithm. I can just press enter. And next, I will fill in the passwords. Well, hopefully without a typo. Just as I say it. Here I used the password as it is not in production environment, just for the testing purposes. But what we can see here is the CCRF secret, which is a new property added in the 4.14 and 1.14. And this secret is used for the creation of the security cookie when accessing the GUI. I will once again use just the password. Okay, so that should be it. All of the options for the script are described in this chapter. I'm now into the configuration file, the ECP properties. From 4.12, this file has changed a little, and we will go through the main changes. First, what we can see is the passwords being encrypted. That is the passwords for the key stores, or the key store, and internal broker. Regarding the internal broker properties, first we can see that this part is a little shorter. There is not the properties for the JDBC connector of the internal broker, that is for the internal and external internal broker. But main thing what I want to focus on is the internal broker definitions. Here we can see the out user and out password. This is the credentials that will be used for the connection to the Artemis, for the Artemis internal broker. We of course need to make sure that the endpoint with the password is also defined in the internal broker itself. This is what we have done during the installation and configuration of the Artemis broker. Next, what we have here is the out key store. By default, during the installation, we get the default out key store, which contains the same certificate authority as the key store located in the ECCo Artemis. This means that we can just use the out key store and the endpoint will be able to connect to the internal broker. However, if we would, let's say, delete the certificate from here or the key store JKS on the internal broker, if we would modify it, we need to also make sure that this key store contains the same certificate authority. Next, we have the internal broker queue prefixes, which are used for running multiple endpoints on the same internal broker. That is not meant as multiple endpoints in high availability setup. That is multiple registrations that endpoints would have their own component codes. And on the end of the configuration file, we can see the new CSRF secret property. As we can see, I have not edited anything for the internal broker or anything. So the endpoint is able to connect to the internal broker just as it is by default out of the box. What I will do is the prerequisite step for the EDX toolbox. If we would go into the, I will skip a little bit, I will go into the installation guide of the EDX toolbox to the chapter 6.6.1.4.2, and here we have the properties for the IMQP API. These properties needs to be defined on the ECP endpoint so toolbox can communicate with the endpoint. So I will edit these properties here right now. These properties can also be defined in the runtime configuration of the ECP endpoint. But this should be it for the configuration. Just to quickly see the admin account being also encrypted. I will now start the ECCo Artemis internal broker. Can go into the logs for the internal broker. It is in the instance folder, the folder log, and here we can see the logs, Artemis and audit log, which are not yet found. Just to make sure that it is running already, should be. And the file is not updating. But what we can do is to open the web console as we have opened it, port 8161, and we can see that it is running. For the credentials, we will be using the endpoint and password credentials that are the default ones. And you can see the Artemis console here. Before I will go through the console, I will also start the ECP endpoint. So we have the queues of the endpoint located, created on the internal broker. What we can see here is that I have forgot to run the daemon reload. Probably this is from previous installations. So I'll just quickly restart the endpoint. And we can open its box. That is, as you may already know, the varlog ECP endpoint. Looking into the Catalina to see if the endpoint has started. So yes, we can see that the server has started. This looks good. We can do the ECP log. Go down. You can see that the endpoint should be started as well. So I will open it in the web browser. Accept the certificate. Once again, we can log in with the default credentials. By this time, I think we should have the queues created. So I will go to it through the web console. If we open the web console, we will see this screen. In case we do not see anything or it is empty, it probably means that there is misconfiguration in the Bootstrap XML or the Eulogia access, where we have put the 4 zeros. As you can see, we are doing all right. Here we can, in this tab, we can see all the acceptors. The IQBS internal acceptor running, which is basically the 5672 acceptor for the endpoint connections. And then we see the addresses. In this part of the GUI, we can see the connections. Here we can see the endpoint being connected with 7 sessions. In sessions, we can see basically the consumer and producers. But moving further to the queues tab, we can see all of the queues here. We can see the name of the queue and the message count, let's say. Also the consumers. There are other columns we can open in this tab, but most useful part of this is that we can go into the queue, let's say through the message count button. Here now we can see that we are in this queue, and here we can delete the queue or rather just purge the queue in case there is pile up of messages. This would probably be scenario for the DLQ queue, which we would want to clear. But also there are operations that we can execute. This is the JMX operations. They are similar to the ActiveMQ. What we can find here is, let's say, pause and resume or some debugging purposes. This would be for the integration of your ECCo, for your integration of your business applications, let's say, and so on. That's for the Artemis web console, and I will now proceed with the installation of the ECP endpoint, and that is the chapter 9, the registration and smoke test. So once again, some prerequisites. The internal broker should be running and the endpoint should be configured. Also, we should have the component code prepared with the registration certificate. Regarding the registration process, we have it described here. We are already on this step. We will go through that in a moment. Below this, we have a little more detail on what characters you can use in the component code, let's say, the endpoint code. And following is that's it. We will end up on this screen. So I will go to the component directory to obtain the registration key store. Just upload it here. Going back to the endpoint, I can just upload the key store with the default password. Here we will fill the component URL of the component directory and its component code after checking connectivity. not be fast, we will fill in the information about this endpoint. The end component code we will be using is the bar. For the web project name, we can use the webinar, organization, contact person, and email. So telephone number. This information should, of course, point to some administrator of the endpoint in case the component directory administrator needs to contact you. Next, I will select the GDPR disclaimer and submit the request. I will be now redirecting this to the dashboard, but quickly let me approve the registration on the component directory. Here we can see we are waiting for the approval. We have accepted the registration in time, and the endpoint can detect it. Endpoint checks for the registrations every minute. So now being on the dashboard, we can see that we are missing message paths. So when I'm logged into the administration account, I can go to the settings page, path section. I, by the way, just clicked on the dashboard tile to just be redirected directly, and I can create a new path. I will create an indirect path through the Gorilla broker for all possible message types. So now going to the dashboard, we can see we should be good. Now we can see going to the messaging statistics tile. We can see the Gorilla broker not being corrected. That is because the Gorilla broker was not yet synchronized, so it basically does not know about us. The broker is synchronized every 5 minutes, and after that we should be corrected. As it is 11:00, I will just go to the server of the Gorilla broker, and I will restart it so it synchronizes automatically. So we don't have to wait. Okay, the broker has already started up, and we can see it is connected. On the settings page, what we can do is go to the messaging connectivity, check connectivity, and check connectivity to some other endpoint in the network. Other thing that we can encounter, although we are synchronized with the broker, the receiving endpoint has not yet been synchronized as well. So I will just quickly to the elephant endpoint, which by the way serves us as the service catalog endpoint. The settings page and put the configuration manually. This should let the elephant synchronize. So now if we do the connectivity check, we can see that we are connected. So in your production environments or just the testing environments, you will probably need to wait for the every 5th minute that the network is synchronized just to be recognized as part of the network. But this has been the same for all of the releases. But yeah, this should be all for the endpoint installation. What we can just to quickly show, as the administrator, I can go into the runtime configuration, edit configuration, And if I wouldn't create the IMQP properties in the properties file, I could add them here. They would be displayed here. I could just fill them in and just save the configuration. This would have the same result. So now, moving to the installation of the EDX toolbox. Chapter 6, installation of the EDX toolbox. Once again, we have some introduction and prerequisites. In these chapters, there is some overview of the network with the endpoints and ECP, and just the EDX. Also, the allowed patterns for the component codes and so on. But I will go to the chapter 6 for installation of Linux. Once again, the process is pretty much the same. We have the variables here. Down, we have the prerequisites, the internal broker. We have two options. We can either have the internal broker shared with the ECP endpoint, or we can have our own. We will use single internal broker for both endpoint and toolbox. Next, we have the ECP endpoint, which should be up and running. EDX installer ready. We are ready to configure it. Have the Java and firewall. So once again, it will be just the RPM-I command. So let me go to the CDOPT folder. And just run the RPM-I toolbox. Okay, once again, we will configure it with the encrypted passwords. So this is of course described in the documentation as well. Stop passwords. Once again, configure password script in the configuration folder of the EDX toolbox with the description of all of the options. Just run it. Let's say now we will use the hashed passwords for the toolbox users, encrypted for the technical passwords, encryption key. I will just use the password again. Default algorithm. I can press the enter and let's fill in passwords. And once again, we can see the CSRF property here. But this should be for the script. And I will move to the configuration of the toolbox itself. This is described in the chapter in the installation guide, chapter 771. So click on down. Configuration of EDX properties. In this chapter, we can see the properties required for the non-high availability installation. This includes the toolbox code, service catalog code, and so on. Next, we have the high availability setup configuration properties, but we will go to that. So to open the EDX properties for the editation and starting on the top. The component code, that is the bool. This is the same, of course, as on the ECP endpoint. Next, we have the component code for the service catalog, which should be the elephant. Scrolling down, we can get to the internal broker configuration, which we will stop here for a little. So previously on the 1.14, we would define the IQP port and host properties, and these would tell us where the internal broker will be listening, on which IP address and on which port. Next, we have the same for the ECP broker, but it was that this is the IP address and the port where we will connect. When using the Artemis, as it is not embedded, the behavior for the properties is now the same. In these properties, we need to define where the internal broker is running. We have defined, as you might remember, the 4 zeros and 5 6 and 2, and we can just leave it here. Also, on the previous versions, we should have the port changed if it was on the same machine with the endpoint. Now we will just use the same port and host. Next, we have the user. For the internal broker, we have added the toolbox user with the password. Yeah, by the way, you can see that the passwords are encrypted, all of them. If we would not define the user toolbox on the ECCo Artemis, then the toolbox will not be able to connect to it. Next, we have the key store JKS location. This is the default key store for the EDX toolbox. And as well as on the ECP endpoint, it contains the certificate authority that is present also on the Artemis. But although we are installing the EDX on the same server as the endpoint, we can leave these properties as they are. And on the end, we can also see the CSRF property. So I will just save it. But one thing we should not forget, as the toolbox is still installed on the same server, we will need to change the ports for the web GUI for the Apache Tomcat. This is described in the EDX installation guide, as it was already in the chapter 6.7. Installation on same machine. Chapter for the Linux, we can see we should go into the etc systemd system configuration file. So let me just move into that folder. It is pretty much the same as on the previous version, but we do not have to change the port for the internal broker. So we can just use 9s instead of 8s. I think that should be everything. We just save it, and we need to systemctl daemon load. This also mentioned in the documentation. But yeah, this should be everything for the EDX installation and configuration, and we can start it. Once again, I will move to the log folder to see the log files, to see if everything is all right. In the Catalina log, we can see the databases tables being created. Let's see the startup of the Catalina. We can see it has started on the port 9443. Next, we have the EDX log. Just to look into that, you can see that everything looks fine. And also, what we can see is the network request being sent and already received. But what could happen is that we could have warnings or error logs in case we have not configured the user correctly and the toolbox cannot connect to the internal broker. We would see connection errors to the internal broker here, but we do not, which is very good. I will now open the GUI for the EDX toolbox. Default credentials. Login in. Going to the settings page, we can see the network configuration being received already. On the Elephant service catalog, I have already defined the toolbox, so I did not do that. As we can see, the configuration being synchronized, so everything should be fine. But nevertheless, I will, just for the testing purposes, I will send to the Elephant. I will send test message just to see if we can communicate. I will say send the registration key store. Successful sent, reloading the page, delivered. And we can see the message being delivered, which is fine. Going back to the Elephant endpoint, we can see the message here, also with the internal configuration message for the network configuration. I can download the file, and on the toolbox I should see the received now. So that is for the connectivity of the EDX toolbox. I will go back into the Artemis console to all of the queues, and we can also see that ECB endpoint queues and EDX internal, which is the EDX queues. What we can do is, based on the name, contains filter out only the EDX queues, for example, if we would want to do that. Just to quickly see the version here being 4.15, and on the toolbox we can see the version right here, 1.15. So yeah, this should be everything for the installation of the 4.15 and 1.15. So maybe some space for questions regarding the installation.
Yeah, doesn't seem like that. But yeah, still in general, the process is still the same, with just one small addition of the internal broker. So
also, although there is new component for the internal broker, I would say the installation process is in the end a little easier. You will see that during the upgrade. There is less to configure. So yeah, moving to the upgrade. We will be upgrading from the 4.12 and 1.13. We will start by stopping the ECCo components, that is the endpoint and toolbox. If necessary, we would update the Java. Then we will install the internal broker and update its configuration, and then we will proceed with the upgrade of the endpoint and toolbox. But the process should be pretty much straightforward. So yeah, moving to the server where we have the endpoint and toolbox. Second, OPT folder. What we can start with is I will start by displaying the endpoint and toolbox running, just to see that we can see the version 4.12. We will be using the slot. Same on the toolbox. version 1.13.1420. So yeah, as the internal broker is embedded, we can see the web console. Okay, so we will start by stopping the components. First, let's do the toolbox and then the ECP endpoint. And let's open the upgrade guides. ECP upgrade guide, that's what we will start with. And we will start by installation of the internal broker. For that, let's in the ECP endpoint guide, we can see the internal broker chapter here under the upgrade chapter. In this chapter, we can see the description that the embedded ActiveMQ internal broker was removed, and then what to do in case we have modified some of the ActiveMQ files and that the installation of the Artemis internal broker will be necessary. This is mentioned here. Also, there is a little migration guide regarding the ActiveMQ transport connector being acceptors in the broker XML of the Artemis, or just to see how to change settings for the memory usage from the broker to the Artemis as well. So yeah, I will start by the installation. Yeah, first what we should also do is to check the Java version, but we can see the latest being installed. So it will not be necessary to update it. I will start by installing the ECCo Artemis. This is what we have. Oh, not yet installed, sorry. Of course, we will use the RPMI. This not freezes.
To leave it now.
Yeah. This is the same as we have already done, so I will go through the configurations a little faster. So going to the configuration. First, I will expose the web console. All of the interfaces. Forget about the OK access. If you have experience with the ECP broker, this is pretty much the same. I will create a user. For the toolbox, I will encrypt it. By the way, we can see is that the password is hashed by default during the installation. Add the toolbox to the IQ row, and this should pretty much be it. So in case we would be just using endpoint and not toolbox, we can just leave it be and it will just work. Okay, I will probably start the ECCo Artemis already, so I do not forget about it later. So this would be the installation for the internal broker, and I will now proceed with the regular upgrade of the ECP endpoint. So the ECP endpoint upgrade, chapter upgrade on Linux, we can see the first step being stopping the endpoint. Of course, if we stop the endpoint, it is good to also stop the toolbox, as it would create issue on the toolbox. Next, we have the Java mentioned. how to install or upgrade it in case the version would be different or it would be older than 6 months. We would need to update it. Once again, the security file mentioned. And let's start. We are upgrading from the 4.12 where Java 11 is not used, so we can just proceed normally. But in case Java 11 would be used, it should not be uninstalled yet. So yeah, already know command rpm, switch for the upgrade. RPM, ECP endpoint RPM. What we can notice is warning for the creation of the ECP properties RPM new. This file contains the default configuration. This is the configuration that you have already had, which is modified. During the upgrade, you can compare these files in case there is some changes. I will go through them. So yeah. Also, what we can see is the out key store being created. What this means that this out key store that was here from the 4.12 contains the ECP model out for the authentication to the ECP broker, but the RPM new out key store contains the extra certificate authority. That is the authority that will be required for the connection to the internal broker. We will get to this in a moment. Also, what we can see, the users and groups properties duplicated as well. Now I will move to the configuration file for the endpoint and see what has changed. ECP users being the same, but what is different is that we have the users properties.rpm save and the groups properties, but we do not have the users properties. These properties files, as you can see, contain the definition of users and rows for the ActiveMQ internal broker. Here you have defined the users. Now this is being done on the Artemis internal broker. So in case you would have some extra users, you will need to migrate them to the Artemis. We can see the toolbox password defined here. We have already added that to the internal broker. Okay, so that's that. Going into the ECP properties. This is our old properties. So you can see the internal broker and external broker properties for the JDBC connection to the database. I will open it in the edit mode and let's go through it. So during the upgrade, what we will be able to do is to just remove these properties. As the next, we have the internal broker host. On 4.12, this property defined where the internal broker was listening. This is also done on the ECCo Artemis and the definition of the acceptor. The four zeros, we have defined them in the acceptor as well, so we can just delete this. Next, we have the authentication. This remains the same. Endpoint and password using the out key store, but we will need to modify it. We will see that in a moment. Logging, management, and next we have the Spring ActiveMQ user and password. These credentials were previously used for the JMS authenticator for the ActiveMQ embedded internal broker, but as the component is not present in the ECP endpoint anymore, we can just remove these properties. We will also find the ActiveMQ in the health indicator. And once again, you can see the MQP API being enabled with the default send handler. But what we can't do, what we can't see is the ECPCRF secret property that is mandatory and we should create it. We can also look, let's say, let's use secret. But anything used. Going back to the ACP upgrade guide, we can see this described here. We can see the internal broker. We have done it and gone through this chapter already. Then we have the upgrade configuration from when upgrading from 4.12. We can see that we need to add the ECPCRF secret property. We can see that the Spring ActiveMQ and password can be removed as they are no longer used. But next, what we can see is the server XML file being updated. From 4.12 to 4.14, we have upgraded the version of the Apache Tomcat, which includes update of the syntax for this file. So we will need to update it. The file is located in the user share ECP endpoint conf, the server XML, and I will update it now. I will be using the midnight commander. I will open it on my PC through the Windscape, just so we can see it better. We can scroll down here to the connector. This connector we can now comment out and copy paste the connector from the documentation. You can see it here. After copying, what we should pay attention to is the attributes for the connector changing. That is, the keystore password is changed to the certificate keystore password. And in case there were any changes, your custom changes, we will need to reflect them in the new connector as well. So let's say we have the out keystore here. If we were not using the out keystore, but we were using some custom JS, we will need to define it here. I will just format it. What we can see that after I have copied the connector from documentation, there was a space. I will just delete it so it is valid. And we can see that we should put the password here. We can see the password here. I will just fill that in. I will save the server XML, and that should be it. Going back to the upgrade guide, next we have the information about Keycloak being no longer supported. So in case you have used it, you will need to go back or rather either use the file-based credentials or you can use the LDAP. This includes removing the ECP SSO value from the Spring profiles active property. Also, all the Keycloak properties can be removed as well. Next, what we can see here is setenv and env configuration. I will open it, but basically in this enconf there is definition for the system variables. Let's open it, and one of the properties we can see, if present, is the JMS folder property, the ECP endpoint JMS, the directory. As this folder does no longer contain the ActiveMQ configuration files, then it is no longer required to be defined to not be used anymore. So here we can just check that it is not defined here, and it is not. But that reminds me that we could also see the JMS folder. The previous contents of this folder were the ActiveMQ internal broker configuration files. There were little more files here, their folders, but after the installation, as there were no changes, we can see that there is just 2 folders for the SSL, HSM or JKS. Going to that JKS, we can see Bootstrap and Broker XMLs. These files are the Artemis configuration files, and basically what these files are, that if we would scroll down, we can see a specific configuration for the ECP endpoint. By default, the Artemis comes with just this part of the configuration, which applies to all of the queues. But if we would want even more specific configuration for the ECP endpoint, we can use this file. Same applies to the EDX toolbox. The Artemis by default comes with configuration that is suitable for both endpoint and toolbox. So just a quick note about this. And next we have the description for the IRPM files. The Prometheus metrics names being changed, that they are no longer available through the Prometheus metrics on the endpoint, but they are available through the Artemis broker, throughout the Artemis internal broker Prometheus metrics. We can display them quickly. If I go to the Artemis console, I can change the URL to the metrics, and we can see the metric is 0. These are metrics for all of the queues and the internal broker itself. So in case you have monitored the queues, you will need to modify your monitoring system to point to the internal broker instead of the ECP endpoint for these metrics. And yeah, that should be all for this chapter. Next we have the older versions. In case you are using some custom receive, send or archive handlers, you will need to redeploy them in the ECP module bar. If you would be using previously Java version 11, you can remove it in this step. Next here we have the startup and installation verification. But that's well, there is one more thing we should do. Going into the varlib folder where we have the out key store defined, we can see the 2 new, or let's say the old out key store and the new one. To see difference between these 2 key stores, I will use the key tool to display the contents of the key store and grab just the aliases names. Let's put the password here. And what we can see here is the ECP installer cert. This is the default one. ECP module out. This is the out key store, out certificate for the endpoint, together with the global NCN integrated certificate authorities from the component directory. But if we would do this for the RPM new file, we can see that there is the installer cert, ECP module out, but most importantly, there is the ECCo Artemis installer cert which is the certificate authority that we will use to connect to the internal broker. I will make a backup of the old outkey store and rename the outkey store.rpm new to outkey store. I will quickly verify that the outkey store is now running under the ECP endpoint with correct privileges, and just to see the key store contents, once again issue the command, and we can see the outkey store now contains the certificate authority, but not the certificate authorities from the component directory. But this is fine, as they will be filled in during the startup of the ECP endpoint. And this should be all for the endpoint upgrade. So
Yeah, maybe just a small addition regarding the certificates. Obviously, the ECCo R5 installer challenge that we will use right now is recommended only for some internal testing environments. For the real production deployment, it's definitely recommended to change it to some your custom certificate, and in that case, you would need to import it to the key store. But yeah, that's I think pretty obvious. Just wanted to mention that as well.
okay, let's start with starting the ECP endpoint. I will move to the log file or log folder. Or let's start with the Katarina. Once again, changes from Liquibase. You can encounter that this can take a little longer. In this part, you can see that there is new indexes created and old ones being dropped. This due to performance reasons. We have these are compound indexes consisting of these ones. But during the creation of the index, if the database contains a lot of messages, it can take longer, like let's say a few minutes. But in our case, the database was empty, we can see that the creation just took a few milliseconds. We can also see that the server has started up, going into the ECP log. Nothing suspicious here. So let's open the GUI. Here is page. In there. Okay. So we can see already that the endpoint was synchronized 1 minute ago. This is timed in the UTC time zone. So it was 1 minute ago. We can also see the version here. Going into the settings tab, I can do a check connectivity to, let's say, Elephant. Once again, message type for the testing. Takes a little longer. Let's try it once more. Okay, so now what we can do is go into the logs and let's see what we have here. We can see an error log for the processor signature being valid. This could relate to the moving of the outkey store. Just look quickly. Just to quickly see the box of the internal broker. There is nothing suspicious here. It is good. Going to the dashboard. I will try to synchronize once again.
Yeah, maybe try to restart the endpoint. Like maybe there's something that needs to be loaded. Because basically right now the endpoint was starting without those authentication certificates, and yeah, it might be possible that it requires some load after it was backed by the TCP endpoint sometime.
And just to be sure, I will also synchronize the elephant. So yeah, the endpoint is already restarted. Going to the settings page, to the connectivity check. Let's maybe try the bool that we have installed during the first part. Some test message. And we can see it is connected. So let's try once again for the elephant. And it is connected as well. This might have been caused by the replacement of the out key store. Of course, in your environments, you would not replace the key store. You can just move the certificate authority from one of the key stores to the new one, or let's say from the new one to old one, or ideally use your own certificate. But yeah, this should be for the ECP endpoint. And we will proceed with the upgrade of the EDX toolbox. So yeah, going to the upgrade guide for the EDX toolbox. Once again, stopping the service, updating to Java. It is with the node for the Java 11, and upgrading just with the RPM. So let's start with it. Okay, issue 0. Going down, we can see the internal broker chapter. This is pretty much the same as on the ECP endpoint. But once again, we can decide between sharing one Artemis broker for both endpoint and toolbox, or we can use separate two Artemis internal brokers for both of the components. We can also deploy the internal broker on different server. But to proceed with the update of the configuration, we will be upgrading from the 1.14. But when upgrading from 1.14, that is the first version that introduced the Artemis broker and the Q prefixes, we can see that we can adjust this property. We will not see that in the configuration files, but basically the reference to this variable in the configuration can be removed from these properties. If you will leave this here, nothing will happen. It will work just fine. But of course, it is recommended to remove this one. So yes, let's start with the actual upgrade with the EX properties. Going into the configuration folder. Once again, we can see the RPM new for the EX properties. And what we can see is the users and roles properties which contains just the default toolbox user with password. So going into the ES properties, this part should be the same, starting with the ActiveMQ property for the data directory. We can remove this as it is no longer used. Next, we have the Spring profile. Once again, if keycloak was used, it is no longer supported, and you will need to switch from it. But next, we have the internal broker definition. So first, let's notice that we are using the port 6672 here. This is the old installation. So we needed to make it a different port from the ECB broker, but now we will use the port of the ECCo internal broker. We can leave the host as it is because the internal broker is listening on the localhost. But what we can once again notice is the key stores. By default, the key store JKS is used. We will once again need to update it so it contains the certificate authority for the Artemis internal broker. Here we can see the credentials that are being used to connect to the internal broker. This is pretty much the same as during the installation. But what we can see here, this should have been commented out. So this is the location of the key store that was used for the EDX toolbox to connect to the ECB endpoint. For just these purposes, I have used the out key store used from the ECB endpoint, but this is no longer required. I can just use the default location with the key store JKS. This is the default key store of the EDX toolbox. Once again, credentials. And what we have here is the out alias. I will need to change it back to the EDX module out. In the out key store, it was ECP module out. In the key store, it is EDX module out. Next, we have the properties mentioned in the guide for the queue prefix in the 1.14 between the equal sign and the ECP endpoint queue definition. There would be reference to the queue prefix property to be used as well. This is described in more detail in the new features webinar. Going down, once again, we can see the ActiveMQ user and password for the JMS health indicator, but we cannot see the EDX CRF secret, so let me quickly define it. Going back to the upgrade guide, that should be everything. So secret and ActiveMQ users. And same as on the endpoint, we have the server XML. Once again, I will open it on my PC through the Visual Studio Code, and the process will be the same. Going down to the connector, quickly copy it from the upgrade guide. Okay, it is split on 2 pages, so just make it a little easier for me. We can comment out the old one and introduce the new one. Let me format it. And once again, we can see this being on the new line. Same issue as on the endpoint. That is just copying from the PDF documentation. Same, we can put the password here And that should be it. Once again, if this was custom keystore, you will need to refer it here. Definition of the ciphers, only the TLS for the version 1.3. So I will save the file. And that should be it. Description how to update the connector once again. Mentioning the ECCo being no longer supported, and the EDX toolbox JMS directory property in the ENTSO-E. We can have a look and just to verify that. We can see our other two files. In the RPM new, we can see the default ENTSO-conf, which includes the aids for the ports, 8443 for HTTP port, mainly. But in the conf, that is our last from the we have already configured, we can see that we have the 9000 ports here. Going into the edit mode, we can see the JMS folder being defined here. So what I can do now is to just remove it and save it. Once again, the configuration folder contains specific configurations for the Artemis, same as on the endpoint. Looking into it, scrolling down, we can see in the addresses that we have the EDX queues here with its specific configurations for all of the internal queues. The 5 megabytes instead of the 20 megabytes for all of the queues, but it's just the detail. So I'm on the road quickly as we have changed the endconf. And to finish the upgrade guide, when upgrading from global versions, which we are not, and mentioning just the keystore, which we will need to upgrade once again, Java 11, and starting the application. We go into the varlib, the EDX toolbox folder, where we can see just the keystore JKS being defined, and once we look what aliases it contains, we can see the ECCo Artemis installed cert here. We don't need to copy it from the RPM new, as the keystore was not changed from the default installation. So yeah, this should be everything. So let's start the EDX toolbox. Once again, I will go into the log files. Let's wait for the startup of the Catalina. Liquibase. No index changes in here, and we can see the server is up and running. Going into the EDX log, what we can see here is pretty much no warnings in case we would have misconfigured the users. We would see warning logs about not being able to connect to either internal broker or the ECB broker, although they are the same. And once again, the network configuration was being sent and received. So next, refresh the page, log in quickly, go to the settings page, And we can see the network configuration being updated like a few seconds ago. Version, you can see we are on the 1.15, and let's try to send a test message to the elephant. Message being once again only delivered, going to the elephant endpoint. You can see it waiting here for us. We can download it, going back to the toolbox. We can see it being received. So yeah, this should be everything for the upgrade. So any questions, maybe?
Yeah, probably nothing. Again, still pretty same process, just with extra internal broker installation. So. Well, in that case, it will be everything from our side. So, yeah, thank you for participating. Thank you for attention. And yeah, if you have some final words.
No, yeah, thanks, Michael and the Unicorn team. So thank you, everyone. If you have no further questions, then we can close the webinar today or session today. And we have, as I mentioned, another planned on 24th of October, which is on high availability. So if you are interested to know more about the high availability setup with the Artemis, please tune in or join us on 24th. Invites already been triggered, but if you don't have those invites, just let me know and I will send it to you. As mentioned at the start of the webinar, the recording from the today's webinar and the past two will be uploaded this week. So by today or tomorrow, and then you can check on the YouTube. I promise that I will provide the YouTube link. So very quickly, I will copy the YouTube link in the chat. So you can have access there. Most of you might be already aware, but yeah, it's the link where you will find the new recordings as well by Monday. So if you don't have any other questions, you can always come back to us via our email ID, which is ecp@entso-e.eu for any questions or contact us regarding it. Thank you very much and have a nice day.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye bye.